Welcome, and I'm Beth Waldman. This is Alicia Pillar.
Hi, everybody.
And Naomi White.
Hello.
I wanted to share a little history about the show and how it came together. We really have been excited about how the show has come together with the meeting of our work and the conversations that you'll hear about today. But Naomi and I met a few years ago. I originally fell in love with her work in this gallery itself during her solo show.
And vice versa.
And we connected, so originally through art, and I too fell in love with Alicia's work before I got to meet her and got to know her. So it's kind of a pretty cool relationship. Art leads to people and friendships, and so it's very exciting in that way. But we started, and Naomi and I and Kara Bonowitz had co-curated a show in our studio where conversations really started about our practices, which had a lot of overlap in thinking and various approaches, and so we started wanting to take it to the next level and take it to this gallery space here. So it's really been over a series of months, all spring and summer, that we've been exchanging readings, show ideas, just inspirations to bring the show together. And so when we were able to
critiques of each other.
Yes, and critiques and looking at a lot of each other's work at different stages, and and then we were like, oh my God, it'd be so amazing to bring in Alicia's work to the show because it's such a big part of the conversation.
Thank you.
And we've been a huge fan individually of your work, and so so it's such an honor to have you here.
Yes, it is.
And I just wanted everyone to start off by introducing themselves, and then we can kind of dive into the show and we'll walk around and look at the pieces, etc. So do you want to kick us off?
I'm Alicia Pillar. I'm a mixed media artist. All of the crazy sort of mixed media dimensional works are mine. I live and work in Inglewood, but I do a lot of very large scale and tiny little things as well. I was just so honored to have them ask me to be a part of the show because it's definitely this interesting conversation between all the works that's very exciting. So that's me, a little bit in a nutshell. Go ahead.
I'm Naomi White. I'm an artist and educator, and I live here.
I'm an artist who's in the Bay Area and in LA, and a lot of the works in this show are really like speaking to my sculptural background. Really happy to have the works be growing into the three-dimensional space, but I've been working two-dimensionally kind of with assemblage and photography as a foundation, and paint. And so I've been coming to LA for 3.5 years and really establishing my practice here, and Keystone's been a big home. So over the past few years, I've also gotten to curate some shows, and that's been a way for me to extend like my practice to with other artists and conversations there. So I have a big space in my thinking about connecting with artist work as part of, or as an extension of my artist practice versus working more in isolation. You know, a lot of the topics we're trying to address in this show are really about the idea of how, fluidity is trying to meet the mounting ecological challenges at hand. So there are questions of how, our social and constructed infrastructure is able to contain all of the changes that are going on. So, we have a lot of gravitas in this, show. There's seriousness that is coming about from our current situation, but you'll find elements of shift and the idea of trying to push some element of hope forward, the possibilities in this very in-depth web of ideas of landscape that aren't just quote nature, but are also social, political landscapes. And during, once again, our continuous pretty heated time in our country and our world. So, really there are interventions, there's acknowledgement of abundance, which can be an abundance of waste, an abundance of accessibility, but also what do we do with all of these elements that are coming forth to us, socially, politically. We have, as you look closer, different details that come out in all of our work that really highlight the various issues between humans and non-humans and the systems that support all of that. So we're gonna go around and speak about some of our individual works that way. We do have a focus in the show of ideas of the material, the map, and the lens. So all of us use photography as a starting point and a photographic approach, including imagery. So that is an important element of the framework of our show. And really the presented work is speaking to ideas that are really prevalent right now today in the LA landscape with PST going on. I mean, I got to have a whole day art hopping yesterday and really got to see work that is at the forefront at a lot of the exhibitions that is very much what's been at the forefront of our practices. So, speaking to climate, disaster, social issues of injustice, physical and psychological shifts that we're experiencing and that our planet is within this Anthropocene. So, we're acknowledging that in our materials and our imagery and how we're bringing it together.
This piece and the red piece on the wall were from a series that I did in St. Louis, but really it wasn't even that it was about St. Louis specifically. It was really me dissecting the Americana, looking at a specific city and what can I mine from this place? Which is so, when I was reading your bio about you using a portrait of a city, I was like, oh, that's what I've been doing. And so for me, these kind of are the past, me speaking to the past. So the images, and there's news clippings from the turn of the century when there was a bunch of race riots happening in St. Louis, still a reflection of just the country. And also sort of looking at heat maps, and really these St. Louis works, and one over there in the corner with an actual old map, were me thinking about how does the landscape of politics affect the landscape of the land. And so you'll see these divisions in the actual city of how those politics affected the actual landscape. And so they were just perfect for this theme. This piece was actually made in 2019, but it was on the ground, it was doing something different, and I'm kind of a hoarder of my own work, and I wanna how can I reconfigure what I already have? And so for this work, I really look at it as this future moment in the show for me, where I'm not just working with these ideas of the Americana in terms of news clippings and my own photography, but this includes some world images, some images I took in India. It's really about lifting us up, literally, and that's purposeful for me to take this guy that was on the ground off of the ground, and it's more colorful. And my work tends to be very in these darker tones that almost kind of are an extension of the American flag tones. Maybe the red is pink, maybe the blue is maybe aqua, but I'm always thinking that way. But this was it's about growth. So I'm starting to move away from that color palette.
I've used these old survey photographs of the West. This is Timothy O'Sullivan, who's working in the 1850s, which is around the time that photography is developing, and there's this parallel path that photography takes with settler colonialism and even chattel slavery to some extent, and it's ending kind of his time, with Civil War. But he's commissioned by the Army Corps of Engineers to go survey the West before it is heavily settled. So I felt like these photographs are representations of these problematic systems that are attached to us and are so hard to get rid of. Though I want to say they're amazing, and the way that he was able to go into the West with these giant cameras and a dark room on a wagon pulled by horses. is incredible, and he was a big hero to Ansel Adams. But the problematic nature of photography and the single lens, omitting all kinds of stories and people, and making the viewer feel like they are happening upon it for the first time, which I want to tell you, I had this German student when I was teaching history of photography, and we were talking about Ansel Adams, and she was absolutely stunned to learn that Ansel Adams hadn't discovered Yosemite, and really upset when she learned that we had never accounted for, the way we had pushed off indigenous people from the land and chattel slavery even. So being German, you account for these things. And it was a really interesting note for me, because I think we, to our fault, get used to things. We normalize violence, and we just get used to accepting horrible things. And she made me realize, we can't keep accepting things that are wrong, and we need to keep talking about them. So anyway, I was tearing and burning into these to bring about these new ways forward, and also leaving spaces open for the lost and stolen stories, and also stories yet to come. So they're all images of hope. There's my cat, Freddie, and this is the Kern River, which I love, and it de-stresses me immediately. And then I was also working with this idea of how we as humans evolved to see color, where we're kind of straining at it for a few thousand years and eventually develop our color abilities. So we start with red, green, I think, or red, and then evolve to see blue more easily. But I was sort of working in these circles, kind of thinking about that, how can we keep ideating and pushing forward to see, a new future we want to live in. So this was called Time Enters the Landscape, and it was originally motivated by that idea to add people back to the landscape where they had originally been omitted. There's my son, and just images of the past and the present. I'm also really motivated in this work by Octavia Butler. So I had a kind of theme of oak trees going through that, and especially looking at her parable series. This is my Lauren Olamina from an old magazine from the 70s. So thinking about her ideas and trying not to make them illustrative, but again, mining these old photographs and trying to bring about elements of her story to explore, her own, which is a similar idea, right? How to look forward as a warning. A parable is a story that teaches us about ethics and morals, and also maybe a spiritual element. So she's using that from the Bible to warn us of what's to come, just by looking at what's in front of us, by taking it to its logical conclusion. So I'm kind of pulling pieces of the story throughout these last 5.
These are 2 pieces that are literally coming from Miami landscapes. I work off of the built environment, and I hardly ever have people in my work, which is not because I'm not considering them, but for me, there's a lot of narrative in the constructed environment. I really use and connect with architecture and spaces, and kind of envision the cultures and homes within them, but also read the landscape. I think as a former public artist, I was always starting with sight and looking at really reading a city and a place and a culture through the architecture. And over time, especially with the pandemic, I do have one piece from the LA area, from the west side, but I have 4 pieces, 3 which I've never shown that are in this show, that really are coming from a trip in December 2021 to Miami, to a certain area of Miami that was still really boarded up and shut down in North Beach of Miami Beach. So I stayed there, and I'd stayed there some years before, and it's this kind of representative of a city that was once really booming, or that area was booming and glamorous. Other areas had been recovered, but because money talks and taxes speak, and so the areas that bring more money to cities tend to lead towards the renovation and the support. So I think about economic support a lot. I think about how that plays into a city's culture and the effect on people. So, when I'm looking at the signs of what has changed, there are often small elements. Here's a shopping cart. My children sometimes find little trees. There's a person, but there's, a lot of like the prime real estate and some other pieces up front to show this, but it's my starting point is this idea in photography and in the lens that we are assuming that there's a static moment, and historically, like Naomi was saying, it's what traditionally was an entry point to people of place where they assumed that was truth, without being able to go there. That's how one reads cities. And so a lot of my work very much strives to show more of a authentic experience of certain areas of the cities that aren't seen, but I want to then take this idea of some idea of truth or existence of a photograph and then break it down to enable other tensions to exist through the use of paint and these topographical sort of lines, which I also love folks have referenced in a calligraphy language sort of direction. And what is art but our own created language, our visual language, but any letter or text out there, how it's created, and then the imposition of a human idea is put upon it. But I feel that within these very built environments, the idea of systems, natural systems of water or another or of change exists through my use of paint. So they develop on tarp, which I've been using since 2016 in a reveal of canvas and a way of accepting that I have been participating in the painterly world while I was schooled as a sculptor, but I, really felt like after traveling on my own in nature and the Appalachian Trail for 6 weeks when I was 20, using the basic material of tarp as my own shelter, to seeing our streets in San Francisco and LA with tarp again as a shelter, and tarp is used to protect against the elements, but it's also protecting something from the elements and from other things. So I started really thinking about the role of material that I wanted in my work. So while I've played around with a few different materials, the photograph now is very much informing the direction, but I'd say these are all very representative of the direction where I'm acknowledging the tarp from the upper areas, and there's black tarp on the other side, so they're dual-sided. These two are from the Miami landscapes. This happens to be from my LA 2021 was when this piece was completed. So I would say it was still in a similar mind space when I'm walking around and documenting. I'm observing and photographing, and so much happens thereafter from the selection of the photos. But there's, like Naomi was speaking about mining, and I know that in Alicia's work, there's so much that goes on in construction and translating material too. And for me, I'm breaking through and creating abrasions in the skin. It's literal skin of a photograph because these are photo transfers. So it's a very physical process at this scale, at least for me, like to create the photo transfers. And so what I'm enjoying, especially with my sculptural background, is a little bit more of that physical creation of the work, even though I'm dealing with a very thin skin, and the interruptions that can be made, which really allow me to get to the next place. So yeah, I think about the way we etch through surfaces. I know we were talking about etching quite a bit. It can be a physical and emotional element to be breaking through a surface. And so for me, breaking through this idea of devolution is what creates the opportunity for hope in my work, because the status quo or the current landscapes are heavy. And so for me, that process is what brings the possibility. So the copper became part of my palette, but it also speaks to like the resources that, we mine a lot to depend on our phones and the Teslas and the Priuses, which I'm guilty of. And, we have this interdependence on resources which are finite. So there's kind of a representation there, and certainly water and water systems and drought has been very prevalent in California. So I can't say that hasn't been on my mind in a sense for like that kind of that search for an oasis, whether that's water or hope or some element. So it's like, it's supposed to create that question or that struggle of what the balance is. When I was working at 18th Street Art Center, when I first came to LA, there was a lot of wind that came in through my studio door, and it activated the pieces in a way in the material that I didn't want to lose that. And also when I was mounting work on panel, which it works well, you still see the materiality. I was losing some of the quality of the material, and so I struggled a lot with it, but I decided to like honor what was going on, which included a big reveal of the canvas. So it kind of all came together at once, like what does it mean to accept I'm using a painterly language? What does it mean to, want it to move? Do I tighten it back? Do I restrain it? Do I, then it's kind of responsiveness to the piece at the moment. But then it also became, I think I've been enjoying the scroll sort of banner dynamic, and sometimes it leads to like ideas of flags, because like, scrolls would be rolled up and they're supposed to be messages of the time. So I started tuning into that, and I don't know if some of that came from the idea that some written sort of text language was coming about, but it was kind of I was lucky to have lots of conversations about my work that then fed it, and then I continued to go in the direction, and it's nomadic.
History of these mounds is like basically washed away, and then as you move forward in this work, you're hitting Dred Scott, who sued for his freedom in 1856. And so this is why I do think of these two works as sort of that past conversation. But the movement of my materials is really meant to give you this sense of like thrusting forward into the future. And so I try to give that clue with my titles.
Researching ideas for this exhibition, you came across, I think it was in an essay shared with you or through another essay from the Turing catalog.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I was floating about in the Hudson Valley for a bit and getting really into the Hudson River School, and then went to Alana and this exhibition called Terrain. And so there was a catalog. Was that where you sourced the quote from J.W.T.
Mitchell? I think it was from his essay Landscapes and Power.
Okay.
But it was you who brought, like, let's make a show about landscapes. And you were looking at this, the essay that Corey Keller wrote.
Corey Keller did. Yeah, so I'll share the quote, and I love this quote which Naomi brought to light that I thought it'd be fun for you to speak about, also within the context of this show and your work. Landscapes are not a noun, but a verb employed as a technique of colonial representation. They are not a genre of photography or painting. They are a medium of imperialism.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Great.
So I was like, yeah. And then I just know you have so much to share surrounding that. I wanted you to share how those ideas come into your work and the ideas in the show.
I guess I connected with it in a few ways. I guess one is that I liked how it explodes the idea of genre, and these, it feels like Alicia and me and you are all working against labels and boxes and trying to kind of make something new. So I liked that. It's like a noun is a verb. There's a certain freedom in that. And then I liked how it activates art, because art is often like, people are like, why are you teaching photography? It's, who needs to know that now or something? And it's so much more about the act of making. So art is not a static thing. It's not something that you just shove in a corner. It's like this thing that's alive and very much in the interpreter's like whatever time in the world that you read it in or see it or experience it, you're going to have a different understanding, and just the act of communication through art, and art as an action. I love that. But then, yeah, the other part is thinking about these old systems. So the way that photography has generally been this single lens, typically or early on, a white male understanding of all of this will be yours and it's all for sale, and like I'm discovering it, this sort of bravado that's just baked in, that is something, I think I was frustrated eventually by the surface of photography, and Julie Green and I talked a lot about this, like the way that collage allows for multiple voices at the same time, multiple lenses, is really what kind of pushed me in that direction, and it seems to be a tool to fight against those older systems.
When people think about photography so much in landscape, and often the white male lens is what comes forth, and and thinking about also what to, especially the ideas of ecofeminism and these ideas of like a different sort of framework, like that show at the Burke really brings forth, like what are these ideas of hope? But I think through the collage and through the abrasion and through the restructuring of image and material, then that, like we were talking about in the beginning, is like offering a more potential nurturing and like avenue of possibility. I thought I wrote down the quote, but I obviously wrote down the wrong one. But yeah,
no, it's that idea of looking ahead that I think we're all doing. We're all looking behind and ahead and trying to figure out what we can plant seeds about and how to. I mean, not that we have answers. It's more just like, let's keep this conversation going and figure it out together, thinking with and thinking through things in multiplicity. Having everybody represented at the table is the only way forward, because we've seen what happens when it's just one demographic that is ruining us. So it's much more about that, this collectivism, I think. And Octavia Butler does that in the Parable series by, like, I was saying, kind of like taking all this understanding of neoliberalism to its logical conclusion, which is that nobody wins, everything's in society collapses, and we have to, and literacy collapses. She's very prescient that way. So it's really like looking ahead, not to build up a dystopia, but to think about, like this as a warning, and how can we make changes now to better things for everybody.
And since you are also right in front of your piece where you're literally, you selected a map, and is this a 2024 piece or 2021 piece?
2021. This is also part of that St. Louis body.
Oh, okay.
And so me actually like curating it and buying like this vintage map. And I tend to, not always, but I'm always like rescuing these like things from the past that maybe have some like ugly history. This was more of like just this like a survey of the city, but really it's about this past moving forward, and again, highlighting what the city's become because of the politics. And this is also a heat map. And so the north part of the city is black. The south part has all the light. It's all racial, it's all strategic, it's all red lighting, it's a whole mess. So that's a big part of the practice too, is just a trash element, and that all gets like put into works later or right away. So I have like literally a section in the studio with that. And then also I'm collecting, people know to give me stuff. Like, and for me it's about like, how do I, we all have a footprint. I would just have to die if I don't want to be a part of the, contribution that we're all making. So I just try to be, it's a balance of like, yes, I have to buy things, but then I'm constantly using trash or upcycling or repurposing. so that there isn't any waste. And it's just it's just always happening. It's just part of the practice now.
I am too, and I love the way it creates a kind of mindfulness about your trash and about everything. Like, you know, even on the side of the road when you see, you know, I'm just constantly stopping and finding and bringing in and cleaning and thinking about it. It's like interesting, you know, to not throw things out. Yeah, there's that element too, same with fire. But I also feel like the corporations are way more to blame for our situation, and it's like us individually is not going to shift much, although we do what we can. But that ad agency that came out with those ads that basically blamed people instead of themselves, like the oil and gas industry was behind that ad that told us about our footprint, which is total bullshit. So it's a fight to be doing the right thing, and then it's also in service of something better that will hopefully, move
But
the needle.
and just I've changed a lot because I used to use a lot more resin, and then in the past, like since COVID, I might have used resin like a few. Like it's been such a minimal, whereas it used to be always, you know. So it's a like conscious sort of how do I make something better, but it's like questioning myself always. Like and there's these, oh God, what did I do? It's called the Climate Initiative. It's a program that basically reaches out to galleries and institutions and artists to get them to like think about this specifically and write a report. And once I did that for the Craft Contemporary Museum show I did like a year ago, and the museum got on board too. So the two of us were, the entity and then me, were like, how are we thinking about our carbon footprint? How are we reducing it? And we were like, okay, the wall vinyl can be recycled paper, like things like small levels. How does
Thinking
it?
about it, it's great, and especially at the institutional level.
Yeah.